Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. Here today we are going to create this duplicate of this Windows Vista icon, and we're going to basically redraw the entire thing so that it is all vector, and as you can see it's a pretty close match. So we're going to go through what you need to know how to do and exactly how you can draw this Vista icon. So what we need to do first is create a new file, and my file is going to be 400 by 400. Obviously orientation doesn't matter whether or not it's portrait or landscape in this case, because either way it's going to look the same. Color mode for now, set it to RGB, and you can give your document a name. I'm not going to right now. I'm just going to hit OK. Now the first thing I did was I imported this picture right here of this Vista icon, which is readily available out there on the web, and I traced it. So I'm going to use the pen tool and I'm going to trace. Basically what I'm going to do is break down this drawing into various sections, and if I show you my other file here, if I come over here to Vista icon draft, you can see that I traced the base as its own shape here. Alright, the shadow is its own shape, the stand is its own shape. Let me zoom in on my recreation of it. The base down there. There we go. The base, the shadow, the stand, the hard drive's base, the side of the hard drive, the front of the hard drive, this edge of the frame here, the actual frame itself, and the screen. So all of those, I also created this auxiliary layer for buttons. I just did this little light here on the hard drive and the light on the monitor and the monitor's button. I just threw them up on the button layer until I needed them later. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this trace that I made, and I'll be back in just a second with that trace. But meanwhile, what you can do is find this icon if you would like to follow along, and trace out all of those sections, and then we can go from there. So here we are. I have got this entire thing traced out. If I shut off that layer, you can see that this entire computer and monitor is all traced out, the front, side, bottom, everything, except the shadow. I didn't do the shadow, and there are going to be a few other things we're going to have to add later on, but the basic shape of everything is drawn out. And that's pretty important, because what we're going to do now is I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I'm going to unlock all of these layers. I'm going to switch to my selection tool. I'm going to, whoops, forgot that it went all the way up there. I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to nudge it over just like that. I'm going to lock up all of my traced layers. I'm just leaving this layer unlocked. I'm going to duplicate that layer by dragging it down to the new layer icon. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to bump it right over here. Now, the reason I'm doing that is because as I'm working on this, I want a layer or a copy of this icon that I can leave unlocked so I can get color samplings and things like that off of it and see what it looks like. But I'm going to lock up the layer that's underneath my tracings. So what I'm going to do here is just double click on this layer and name it icon reference. Alright, I'm going to leave that unlocked, and let's get to work here. We're going to start with the side of the hard drive or computer, whatever you want to call it. And as soon as I select this, I'm going to realize that I have a couple problems. First thing is that my hard drive base is sitting on top of the front and side of my hard drive, and the screen is all the way at the bottom. So let's quickly reorganize these so that they will be in the correct order. Screen has to go all the way to the top, just underneath buttons, and the frame goes right underneath that, and the stand goes right underneath the frame, and the base can stay where it is, and the hard drive base goes to right above base. You know what? I'm going to click on this flyout menu. Oops. Select the actual layers palette. I'm going to hit the flyout menu for the layers palette, palette options, and I'm going to make my layers just a little bit larger. Let's try 35 pixels. Alright, that should make it a little easier for you to see here. There we go. Okay, so I've got screen, frame, stand. Now hard drive front should be in the front, hard drive side, and hard drive base, and then the base here. And then frame side I can just drag up so it's right underneath frame. I definitely want it to be underneath frame though. Okay, so there we go. Just like that, we have all of our layers organized the way we need them. I'm going to go back to palette options and hit medium size for my rows, because that's what I'm used to working with. Alright, now we're going to unlock the side of the hard drive. Now, this side of this hard drive computer is actually going to require 3 gradients on this one shape. So we're actually going to have to duplicate this gradient, but we're not going to do that quite yet. We're just going to grab this and actually deselect it really. We're going to bring the swatches palette in. You're going to be doing a lot of color grabbing, color gathering, color sampling with the eyedropper tool. So actually something you might want to do is double click on the eyedropper tool and make sure your raster sample size is point sample. We want to use point sample so we just, we don't accidentally get some blues off the screen or anything. That's not going to be an issue though here for the hard drive. But like when we start sampling stuff around this frame, it's going to be more of an issue. But it shouldn't be too much of, a big deal. Just, I'm sticking with point sample. Just hit OK. And we've got our eyedropper tool. We're going to start with this light gray right up here at the top. Not the very light gray on top, but just below that on the actual side of the computer. We want to grab that gray and drag that to our swatches palette. And then we want to come down to the very bottom and get that dark gray and drag that to the swatches palette. So that's going to be our first gradient here on the side. I'm going to select that path. We're going to fill it with that gradient, and we're going to get rid of our stroke. I'm going to grab my gradient palette right here, and we're going to select this object, then select that gradient. Now I'm going to switch out the white with the light gray by just dragging over and dropping on top of that color stop. I'm going to use that darker gray, switch that with my black. Now I'm going to rotate the angle to about 90, no, let's try 270, and now I'm just going to select angle, and I'm going to use the arrow keys and nudge them until I get it to just the way I want it. And I'm going the wrong way. And 290 looks about right. We can edit it later if it needs to be edited. We're going to stick with 290 for now. So that's our base gradient. Now, one thing you may notice is that this front corner here of the hard drive is darker. So let's make that right now. Let's grab that layer and copy it, Command or Control C. Then Command or Control F to paste on top. That essentially pastes it right in place. Now we're going to use that black to white gradient, and I'm going to grab the gradient tool, and I'm going to bring it out of this corner. Oops, I actually need to bring it down from the top so that we have full black in that corner, just like that. Now what I'm going to do is grab the transparency palette. By the way, all these palettes I'm using, if they're not out, come up under Window, and you can find any of them. Transparency, swatches, gradient. They're all up under your Windows button there in your toolbar. And we're going to switch this to multiply. And looks like we should reduce the opacity a little bit. Let's try 65. Let's stick with 65 for now. Matter of fact, I'm going to, 65, grab your direct selection tool, select that gradient, that black to white, and just contain that black a little more by sliding the diamond slider on top. Alright, that's going to force that black to stay in the corner and fill the majority of the shape here with white. So most of that white is just disappearing because we have our blend mode set to multiply. Alright, now we need to create this highlight here that we have running along the top. That's no problem either. We're going to duplicate our path again, Command or Control C, Command or Control F to paste it. Now we're going to apply our black to white gradient, and I'm going to raise the opacity back to 100 because we just duplicated that shape, so it keeps the opacity and also keeps that blend mode. I don't want either of them, so I'm going to get rid of them. Now I'm going to grab the gradient tool, and this is going to be kind of touchy here because we want it to sort of start and just run a white line across the top. So I want to shrink the white into a very small area. Now using the gradient tool, I'm going to run out, and I'm just going to keep trying until I get it about straight. Then I'm going to come in here to the angle area, and I'm going to move it up or down until I get it about perfect. That looks pretty good there. I want to bring the black. Oops. Make sure that's solid black, by the way. Just like that. I'm going to hold down Alt and drag out another handle. And I want this on the top here to just pretty much stop at a straight line, almost a straight line, not quite. Just kind of like that. That looks about right. So looks like it should be coming out of this top corner here of that, just where the curve starts on the very front of your computer. Okay, now we're going to switch this to, let's try the lighten mode. That looks like it does a pretty good job. Let's try screen. No, let's stick with lighten. Lighten does a nicer job. And then we're just going to reduce this opacity. Let's try 50. And 50 looks pretty good. Let's look, just check, see what it looks like over in our reference area. It needs to be just a tad bit lighter. Let's up it to 60. 65. All right, we're going to stick with 65. That looks like it's pretty good. So that's pretty much the entire side of the hard drive. The only thing we need to do is add a couple little highlights down here at the bottom. So we can do that with the rectangle tool, actually, is what I'm going to use. I'm just going to draw out a couple thin rectangles here. And I'm going to apply the default black to white gradient. I'm going to drag this black color handle, which again doesn't look like it's full black. I'm just going to drag this in there. There we go. And I'm going to switch the location to 50%. I'm going to drag, hold down Alt, by the way, to copy handles and drag out another handle. Now spread these diamonds pretty much as far as they'll let you go. Okay, just like that. Perfect. Now, I did that all backward. We want to put white in the center and black on the edges. So just drag out white to the center and you drag out black and replace those white ends. Just like that. So there we go. I'm actually going to drag this gradient up into the swatches palette to save it because we're going to use that gradient a little later on, probably. I'm going to zoom in here to the bottom of the hard drive. I'm going to move the gradient and the transform palettes. Now, I've got my bar here. I'm going to shrink it down. Be a little bit smaller, make it a little bit thinner, maybe not quite so long, and I'm going to tilt it up onto an angle. Let's be more of an angle than that. And bring it down a little bit. Look what I did. Alright, hit edit. I'm going to cut it off this layer. You can see right now it's on the icon reference layer. I don't want it on the icon reference layer. Command or Control X to cut it off of there. I'm going to lock that icon reference layer up. I'm going to select hard drive side. I'm going to hit Command or Control F to paste it in place. There we go. We pasted it right on top. Now I'm going to bring this back, so because remember the frame here is going to come down to this red line, so I want this entire highlight to be showing. I'm going to hold down Alt, drag out a copy of this, just to right there. I'm going to select both of these, grab my transparency palette, and switch the blend mode to lighten. Screen, no, we're going to do lighten. And we're going to reduce the opacity to, let's try 75 to start. 75 is not going to be enough. Try 40. Okay, 40 looks good. Now, let's hit Command or Control 1 to zoom out to 100%. Alright, perfect. We can see we're getting our hard drive coming along pretty nicely. This layer right here with the darkening is a little too dark, so we're going to grab the transparency palette. Let's drop that to, let's try 40. That looks much nicer. So there we go. We've gotten the side of the hard drive done. But the one last thing I want to do to it is notice along the very top of the hard drive there's that little gray line running. So let's just add that real quick. That's going to add some definition and really let us know that we're at the edge of our hard drive. Let's just grab one of these dark grays here, drag it over to our swatch, or our stroke swatch I should say, and just click and drag and draw a line out and just run it off behind the monitor. Don't worry about where it stops exactly because again the monitor is going to cover up all of that stuff. Grab the direct selection tool and we're going to just select the anchor point of the line right there. We're going to pull it down to right there because we just want it to run off and disappear behind the front. The front is going to come up and cover up any kind of rough edge we create or anything. So just you can keep all of that in mind as you're working with this. I'm going to grab the stroke palette here and we're going to reduce the stroke to about half a pixel. That looks pretty good. I'm going to move it out just a little bit, just like that. Move the stroke palette out of here. Go back to 100%, and right there we've got a nice line going across the top of the hard drive. So that's the side of the hard drive or the computer. I've been calling it a hard drive this whole time. It's really the computer. So let's move on to the front of the computer. To start creating the front, first thing we need to do is lock up the hard drive side layer, unlock the hard drive front layer, unlock that icon reference layer again so we can get some color off of it, or some grays off of it. It's not really color. Zoom all the way in over here to the front of the computer and grab your eyedropper tool, and what we want to get is the gray at the very bottom, not this highlight gray, but there's another gray in between. That highlight we're going to create separately. Now one other thing you should do here is we're just going to create a swatch of that blue, and I'm going to drag that up to the swatches palette. I'm just placing these blue swatches in between all of my various gray swatches. For instance, all of these had to do with the side of the hard drive. Now we've got this blue, so we know that we're moving on to the front of the hard drive. It's just so we don't get confused with all these different shades of gray up here in the swatches palette. So grab that gray at the very bottom. That's the bottom. We've got this lighter gray coming toward the center. And then again, a somewhat darker gray at the top. Come back over here to the computer. Move my swatches palette out of the way. Alright, we're going to select the front of it. Again, get rid of that stroke. I just switched it to the fill. But we're going to switch the gradient to the fill. Alright, and I have this gradient that we were just working with. I'm going to switch it to the default black to white. And I'm going to drag in that darker gray. I'm going to drag the lighter gray to about the center. And then this other gray to that far side. And I'm going to make it go straight 90 degrees, straight up and down. That looks about right. Maybe we should move this down a little bit to about 40%. That looks good. So that's our base gradient. One thing I do want to do with this is just apply a stroke. We may take the stroke off later on, but we shall see. Give it the darker gradient, actually an even darker gradient than that. This graphite default swatch is good. Grab that stroke palette again and reduce the stroke to 0.25 and hit this align stroke, the one right here in the middle. Let's align the stroke to the inside of the shape. That way we don't have this extra bleeding. You know, let's move it up to, now a half is definitely too big. Well, I don't know. I probably shouldn't say that. No, you know what, a half looks pretty good. Let's leave it at a half for now. If we need to change it later on, we can always do that. Zoom back in on the computer. I'm getting a little cluttered here. I'm going to move that hard drive out of, or the stroke palette out of the way, excuse me. Make my layers palette a wee bit smaller. And there we go. We have the base of our front, the computer front. Select it. Command Control C to duplicate it. Command Control F to paste it in place. Now, what we need to do is we're going to shut off that path layer on the bottom. Okay. So if we shut off both of them, we just get back to the old non-vector copy of this icon. So I'm going to shut off the one on the bottom, and I'm going to select this one. I'm actually going to double-click it, or no, not double-click it, excuse me. Bring up the transparency palette, and I'm going to reduce the transparency to about 25. Yeah, let's make it a little more. Let's make it 50. That's better. Now, I'm doing this so I can see this where the darker gray starts and where the lighter gray starts. I'm going to come over here and grab the knife tool. The knife tool is hiding underneath the pair of scissors. In that same little area, it's next to the slice tool right above the magnifying glass. It's the knife tool. Hold down the Alt key when you're using the knife tool to constrain it to a straight line, and hold down Shift to force it to stay at straight or 45-degree angles up and down or straight across, that kind of thing. Now, using, whoops, of course I'm on the wrong layer again. Select this path that we just reduced the opacity. Hold down Alt and Shift and just make your cut right across there. You can see the knife tool has just split that path in two. So I'm going to select the bottom part of it and I'm just going to delete it. Okay, it's going to tell me this contains artwork. Oops, I'm going to hit no because I almost deleted the whole layer. You want to select that path and we're just going to drag it right to the trash can. Okay, so I'm going to select the top portion here, and now you're going to see when I up the opacity to 100, the only area I have changing color is that very top portion. That's good. And I need to select the selection tool in order to select things. And I'm going to get rid of the stroke, and I'm going to give this a darker gray. I'm actually going to leave that selected. I'm going to unlock my reference layer. I'm going to scoot over to my reference layer, and I'm going to select one of these like bluish grays in the center. All right, right there, that one. You can see I've given it that gray. So that's the top portion. If I turn the bottom back on, you can see that I have that now as well. So that's the first part of the front of this. We need to duplicate this layer real quick. Another quick way to duplicate an object is just select that little layer and drag it to the new layer icon. That duplicates it just like that. I'm going to select it, grab the default black to white gradient. I'm going to rotate it to be, not 90, 270 degrees. And I'm going to push the white up to the top more. And I'm going to grab the transparency palette and just switch that to lighten. And lighten doesn't quite do it. Let's try screen. Nope, screen doesn't quite do it either. Lighten. Now the reason this looks funny, this is actually a common problem. you have to make sure that you're using pure 100% black. Now if I look at my color palette, it says I'm using 100% black, but I'm really not using rich black. And rich black can be achieved by switching over here to CMYK, and you have to jack up the cyan, the magenta, and the yellow all to 100%. That is 100% real 100% rich black. I can switch back over to grayscale, but I want to keep that in cyan, magenta, yellow, CMYK color. So I can keep my pure black there and keep that looking good. I'm actually going to switch it back to screen because now, screen's going to give me a better look. What I do want to do, though, is crunch that white all the way up there into the top, even more than it is now. Okay, just like that. And I'm going to reduce the opacity to, let's try 40. We just basically want it to lighten up a little bit up there. Let's lighten it up a little more than that. 50 looks good. I'm going to move my transparency palette off screen. So, zoom out a little just to compare. It's looking good so far. All right, what we need to do is unlock the hard drive side layer, and we're going to grab those two little highlights we placed down here at the bottom, right here, these. You see path. I'm going to Command or Control C to copy them. And I'm just going to lock up the hard drive side layer. I'm going to select the hard drive front layer, and I'm going to paste them. Not particularly paste in place, just paste. And I'm going to rotate them till they're going straight up and down. And I'm now going to move these onto the front of the computer. Now, with these, I need to edit them a little. Number one, I need to move them a little further apart. And I need to make them a little wider. So I'm going to use the Select tool. I'm just going to make it a little bit wider. Make this one a little bit wider too. Now, notice I am keeping them sort of offset, if you can see that. See, this one's a little bit higher than this one. If I select them both, different heights. I'm going to double click on this layer and switch this to green so you can really see it. Okay, you can see they're different. This one stops here, this one stops all the way up here. That's just to sort of follow this highlight we've got coming through here on the front. Okay, so those are the highlights for the front of the hard drive. Let's grab our line tool. Get rid of the fill. The line doesn't have a fill anyway. And we're going to set this dark gray here, almost black, as our stroke. We're going to draw two lines here, holding Shift to make sure we keep them perfectly straight. I'm just going to copy that one, paste it in place, and move it over a little bit, just like that. And I'm going to select each of these lines, both of them, come up here to Effect, hit Stylize, Outer Glow. I'm going to preview this. I'm going to change the mode to normal. I'm going to change the blur to 1, so 1 pixel blur, and 100% opacity. And basically what we just did is just darkened up the center of this area up here. But really, we're duplicating two dark lines that we see over here on this tower. You can see we see two dark lines there. So we're just trying to make it look as close as we can. All right, the last thing we need to do to the front of this is give it that little green light. So I'm going to unlock the buttons layer, and this little red square is on the button layer. I'm going to hit Command or Control X to cut it off the button layer, lock the button layer back up, come to HD front, hard drive front, computer front, whatever you want to call it. Command or Control F to paste it in place. Swap the fill and the stroke, so now it is red. We're going to give it this green, oops, we're going to give it the green fill, get rid of the stroke altogether. Okay, just like that. And I'm going to come up here to Effect and hit Outer Glow, not Apply Outer Glow. Apply Outer Glow applies that same exact outer glow. I don't want to do that, although I can't edit it because it's in Effect, but, you know, we can just hit Outer Glow and we don't have to take the time and go do extra editing. So hit Outer Glow. We're going to preview it. And we're going to change the color here to a very bright green, almost beachy green. Okay, and we're going to switch the blur to 2. I think that's going to look a little better. Let's make it 1.5. There we go, 1.5, and at 100% opacity. So now we've got that nice little green light. So now there's our hard drive. The one other thing I want to do here, well, obviously, is create the hard drive stand for it. So we're going to lock up the hard drive front. We're going to select stand. Oops, not that stand. The hard drive base right here. That one. And this is going to be pretty easy. We're just going to get rid of the stroke, and we're going to fill it with a dark gray. I'm going to just leave that selected. We can scoot over here. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit. Leave that selected. I'm going to grab the eyedropper, and when you leave something selected, use the eyedropper. I'm just going to select one of these dark grays off the other base. Okay, it automatically fills it. We are going to fill the stroke with an even darker gray. I'm just dragging the swatch out of the swatches palette and dropping it onto the stroke area of our color options in our toolbar. Alright, and the one last thing we need to do to this base is just create one light gray and one dark gray line. So that's going to be pretty easy. We're just going to zoom in on it. Back out a little bit. Grab the line tool with the dark gray. Just draw your line and hit Command or Control C and then Command or Control F. Move that line down a little bit. And we're going to switch this to a somewhat lighter gray line. It's a little too light. Just like that. We're going to select both of the lines, not the shape, just the two lines, and we're going to apply an outer glow to this as well. Preview it. We don't want green. We want black, and we want a one pixel blur. Let's try 50% opacity. That looks good. Hit OK. Just like that, and we have created our hard drive stand. It's actually a little too dark. Let's select that path again, and let's give it a lighter gray, something more like that. But now that I've done that, I need to make this just a little bit lighter so you can see it. That looks better. Going to make this, make the darker line. If you can select it, there we go. Make the darker line a little bit lighter. I'm going to grab the color palette, switch over to grayscale, and just make it a little bit lighter. It's just a wee bit too dark. Alright, I'm just hitting Command or Control 1, by the way, to quickly zoom out to 100%. I'm going to zoom in. Now, the only thing that's bothering me is on the actual path layer, the stroke is just a little bit too big. Let's try downing it to half a pixel. Alright, that looks much better. Okay, so that's the entire computer. We just created that. Let's move on to the screen. Now, the first part of the screen that we're going to create is the frame of the screen. The actual screen we're going to create last because that's what's going to kind of sit on the very top of everything. So we're going to lock up the HD base, or the computer base, if you will, layer. And I'm going to grab the frame layer. That's this frame running around the actual screen. Alright, so unlock that layer, grab frame. Now, well, before you grab frame, actually, we're going to come over here. We're going to take like 6 gradient samples of this gradient that runs around the screen, because the screen is really going to be the focal point of this little illustration we're doing. So I want the screen to be as perfect as possible. So we're going to grab the eyedropper tool. We're going to grab that blue, set that up in our swatches palette to set ourselves aside. We're going to start down in the bottom left-hand corner and work our way to the top right, because this gradient moves diagonally across the screen. You can see how it moves across the screen diagonally. And we want to take color samplings going across diagonally. So I've got one from there. I'm going to get this lighter gray here. I'm going to get a darker gray here. Well, no, I'm not going to get darker gray. I'm going to get this lighter gray up here. I'm getting even lighter gray here. And then we come all the way to white. So we've got like 5 color swatches here that we're going to build a gradient out of. Now you can see that our screen, because it was selected, is filled with the last swatch. We're going to switch that though. We're going to give that black to white gradient. And we're going to build our gradient now. We're going to start with the white over on this side, actually. Start with the white over there. We're going to drag out this swatch, place it right here. Drag out the next swatch behind it, place that one right about the middle. Drag out that swatch, place it right there, and drag out that darkest gray and replace that in the back. So there's our metal gradient. We're going to make the angle. Let's set it to 45. That looks about right. We've got it running across diagonally just like that. And this is your gradient. You got a darker, slightly lighter, slightly lighter, slightly lighter white. That's the gradient. And that's the frame. The one last thing I want to do to the frame is just give it a stroke. We're going to give it, let's try this darker gray here. Grab the stroke palette. We're going to reduce it to a half point and set it to inside. Align the stroke to the inside. Now, that's the frame of the screen. We're going to lock that back up. We're going to grab the frame side right here. That's this. And we're just going to basically fill this with a simple black to white gradient. I am just going to give it a light gray on the top, on the bottom, excuse me, and a darker gray at the top, just like that. And that's it. That's the side of the frame. We're going to lock that layer back up. Oh no, excuse me. We're not going to lock that layer back up yet. We're going to select it and get rid of that red stroke. You don't want that red stroke. Okay, we're going to lock up the frame side. We're going to grab the frame stand. You can see this is right here at the bottom. And this is going to be pretty easy. We're just going to get rid of the red stroke as usual. And I'm just going to come over here and grab, that medium dark gray, and we're just going to leave it a solid color. Okay, so we're going to lock the stand back up. Now, if we zoom out, you can see that our computer is really coming along here. If I get rid of both the reference layers, that's what we've drawn so far. So that's pretty good. We're moving on up. Let's keep moving here and draw the actual base here before moving on to the screen and the shadow, which are the last two things that we're going to draw. So with the base, what we need to do is, well, unlock the layer first off, but select the base, and we need to fill it with a gradient, but we're not going to use a regular linear gradient. As you can see over here, this kind of starts here and then fades out. So we can try using a radial gradient, but that'll probably be really tricky to kind of tweak and fine-tune. So what we're going to do is use the eyedropper tool. Once again, create your blue divider, and select the very lightest gray that is down there on the base of our reference file. Not one of these highlights here. We've got those two highlights. We're going to draw them as well. But just imagine those aren't there. The lightest gray. Drag that up there. And then a darker gray, like that. So we've got those two. All right, come back over here, select that path, get rid of that stroke as usual, and fill this with the darker gray. Okay, now hit Command or Control C to copy, Command or Control F to paste it on top. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here for this part. And I'm going to select my selection tool, and I'm going to hold Shift, and I'm just going to scale this down to make it much smaller. Alright, I'm going to give this the lighter gray too so we can see it here. Now I'm going to tip this up a little bit to kind of try to match that highlight that I'm seeing on the front, of the other monitor stand that we're copying. Okay, you can see the other highlight is kind of sitting right there. It's kind of egg-shaped. Maybe I should make it a little bit smaller and tip it just a little more. And just set it right about there. Now, we're going to use the blend tool to create a kind of custom gradient is what we're going to do. So the blend tool is right here. The hotkey for the blend tool is W, but before we use the blend tool, we need to double click it. And we're going to set the spacing. Default is smooth color. We're going to set it to specified steps, and we're going to try 100 steps to start us out here. I'm going to hit V to switch back to my direct selection tool, because when you're using the blend tool, you need to have both objects selected. Alright, I'm going to select the blend tool, and I'm going to click one anchor point of one shape and one anchor point of another shape. You can see what this has done is it's created this gradient that's just kind of shooting out of there. It's not quite right though. Try using the anchor point on the very top of the smaller shape and at the very back of the other shape. That's much better. So now we have this custom gradient that we have just created, and that's the background of our stand. What we need to create now are the highlights. So I'm going to grab the rectangle tool, and I'm going to set my fill to a black to white gradient, and I'm just going to draw a rectangle here on the stage. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to rotate it so that white is at the top, black is at the bottom. Set that right over here. Now I'm going to use my direct selection tool, and I'm going to select one of these top anchor points, and I'm going to delete it. Okay, I just selected one of the anchor points. I didn't actually select the entire top. Now I'm going to use the direct selection tool to select both of the unjoined anchor points. I'm going to hold down Shift and select both of them. I'm going to come up here to Object, go to Path, and hit Join. That way we're reconnecting the path. I'm going to drag that out so we've got more of a triangle shape. Now I'm going to use a gradient palette, and I'm going to drag the white to the middle. I'm going to drag black to both sides. I'm going to hit this diamond on top and shift it toward the black at the top. So the black at the top, there's not going to be nearly as much of it. The black at the bottom, there's going to be much more of it. Again, check the color palette. Make sure that you're using true CMYK rich black. And you can see we aren't. So I need to just up all of these to true black. The reason we need to do that is because when you use black in screen mode, if you expect the black to screen out properly, it needs to be that true rich black. Alright, we are going to grab the transparency palette now and switch this to screen. Now I'm going to scale this down quite a bit, and I'm going to rotate it a little bit here. Just set that right up against the edge. I'm not going to rotate it quite that much, just kind of like that. You're just going to have to kind of mess around with it yourself till it looks good. Now, one thing I do need to do is add more black to this shape. There's not enough. There's far too much white. Okay, that looks better, and we're going to reduce the opacity to, let's try 40 to start us off. That looks pretty good, actually. Alright, now the second highlight is going to be much, much easier. The second highlight is just going to simply be a white line, a white stroke. So I'm just going to set my stroke to white here, and I'm just going to draw out a line just like that, reduce the opacity to 40, and increase the line weight to 2. Well, actually, no, do 1.5 points if it will allow. Yeah, there we go. That's right there. That looks good. We're going to move that over a little bit, just like that. And there's our other highlight. I want to select the actual base. You can see it's this custom gradient that we created. It's the blend. And we're going to select the path on the bottom, okay? If you open the blend up and look at the two sublayers of the blend, select the path layer on the bottom and apply a stroke to it. We want to give it a decently dark gray stroke and set the weight of that stroke to 0.5 point. So there, that is the base of the monitor. If we zoom out to 100%, you can see that there's our monitor. Now the last thing to create is the screen. So the screen, as you can see, is this blue shape, and we got a few highlights that we're going to draw onto it. It's going to look pretty cool when this whole thing is actually finished. Lock up the base layer. Select the screen layer. Actually, before we select the screen layer, again, I'm getting ahead of myself. Use the eyedropper tool, and we're going to select two blue colors. So I'm going to select the dark blue here at the bottom of the monitor, and I'm going to select a just slightly lighter blue. Matter of fact, we're just going to use that dark blue. Okay, I'm going to lock up the icon reference layer because we're done with selecting color now. I know these highlights are white, and it's just a matter of finding the correct opacity. So I'm going to select that screen layer. I'm going to get rid of that stroke, and I'm going to fill it with that dark blue, just like that. Now, I'm going to select this path. I'm going to copy it. Now I'm going to select the actual screen layer, not the sublayer. Hit that little circle that's right up there to the right-hand side of that screen layer, okay? If you close the layer up, select that because we want to mask this entire layer here. And you'll see why we want to do this. Double-click. Now I'm in the transparency palette. Double-click next to the little thumbnail and hit Command or Control F. Okay? Come over here to your Layers palette. You can see all of your layers are gone except this opacity mask. Select the opacity mask and switch the foreground color to white. All right? Double-click on your thumbnail again to get out of editing the layer mask, and that's it. We have the entire layer masked. Now the reason we want to do that is because we need to draw these highlights, and instead of drawing exact edges, we can just draw them rough, and it's just going to fall within the mask. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's grab the pen tool, set our foreground color to white. We're going to lock up that path. Set our foreground color here to white, and let's draw this first big highlight. Just click with the pen tool up here. Click and drag a slight angle. It's not quite enough. Let's try right here. Just like that. And then we can just loop it around on the outside. Now notice all that white is staying within our mask. Now we don't want this entire thing to be white. We actually want it to be a black to white gradient. And I'm going to grab the gradient tool and we're just going to pull it straight down from here. Just kind of like that. I'm going to push more black into it because we're going to use the transparency palette here and switch this to light. Nah, light doesn't really look good. A screen looks much, much better. And I'm just going to shift the black down a little more. Just kind of like that. And I'm going to reduce the opacity to, let's try 85%. 85, 90. 90 looks good. Okay, so we can lock up that path. So you can see now that because we have that mask set to that screen layer, everything stays within our screen. All right, so we need to create another highlight. We've got this little highlight looping across the back, so we're going to create this highlight just like that. Just like that. Grab our gradient tool again. We want the white to start here and come across, kind of like that. I'm going to grab my gradient palette, and I'm going to bring more black into the picture, kind of just like that. going to set this to screen as well. Now, the tricky thing about this is when I deselect this, you're going to see that it wants to interact with my other highlight here. So we need to stop that. The way we're going to do that is by masking this sublayer. Okay? So I need to mask it to keep it from covering or messing around with this first highlight. So I'm going to select that first highlight so I get that shape. Command or Control C. I'm going to lock that layer back up. Now I'm going to select that path layer. I'm selecting the sublayer, not the whole screen layer, just this sublayer. And I'm going to give this a mask. I'm going to unclip it so the whole thing shows. Now I'm just going to hit Command or Control F. So now I've just pasted in that shape that I just copied. And I'm just going to switch the foreground color to black. So now when that runs into, whoops, I want to make sure that that opacity mask is set to 100% opacity. So now when my little arced rough circle runs into that other highlight, it just stops. It gets cut off. That's perfect. All right, the one other thing I want to do here is just push the black in a little bit further, just like that. Now I want to reduce the opacity of this down to about 50. Okay, that's good. We just need to create one last highlight, and that's this little triangular highlight here, coming down across the screen, just like that. I'm going to start it right here, pull down, just like that, perfect. Set this to screen blend mode as well, and reduce the opacity to somewhere around 50. Make sure you hit 50. Grab your selection tool and move away, and there we go, we have that. The last thing I want to do is unlock those layers, but I want to grab my line tool, grab a dark blue, like this blue here, and I just, or excuse me, not a dark blue, a white, what am I thinking? A white, and drag a line across the bottom of the screen, just right like that. All right, and give it a white stroke. Now we're going to reduce the opacity of this down to 35. I take that back, 55. 55 looks good. Move my transparency and gradient palettes. Deselect, move away. Okay, that looks better. Now we've created the screen. But looking at it, the one little thing I want to do is I actually want to duplicate the path that's just that dark blue box. I'm going to duplicate it, paste it in place, and drag it up above all of the rest of those highlights. And I just want to swap the stroke and the fill, and I want to give it a 1.5 point stroke, and set that to the inside. Okay, so we've got that. You know what? It might actually look fine just with a 1 point stroke set to the inside like that. Yeah, it does. A 1 point stroke set inside. Okay, that's that center button again. And that's the screen. The final thing to do is just draw the shadow. And that's actually going to be pretty easy to do. We're going to lock that layer up. We're going to select the icon reference layer and create a new layer on top of that. Double click it, name it shadow. And just grab your pen tool. We can leave the dark blue stroke for now. And just sort of follow the basic flow of this other shadow here. I'm just going to assume that the shadow comes around there and reconnects here on the front. Hold down the Alt key and just edit that handle just a little bit. All right, swap the stroke and the fill to make it fill with blue. Switch out the fill color, make the fill color dark gray, just like that. I'm actually going to hit my selection tool. I'm going to hold Shift and Alt to shrink this down a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. And I'm going to hit Effect, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're going to try a 4-pixel Gaussian Blur to start with. And that actually looks pretty good. I'm going to select the shadow layer now. And I'm going to reduce the opacity to right around 25. See if that looks good. Now it needs to be a little more than 25. Let's try 40. 40 looks pretty good. So right there, we just drew this entire Vista icon, completely vectorized it, and did a pretty nice job of it pretty quickly. So that's it. That's how you copy icons, or kind of the basics of copying an icon. It's going to take practice before you really get good and very proficient at it. But there you go. That's how I do it. And that finished icon is right over here. That's what it should look like when it's all finished and done. And that's it for this one. I hope you learned something. It sure has been a long one, and I hope you enjoyed it. And please go check out the site. That's www.tutvid.com. Thank you very much for watching.